This is pen and ink technique video number 1. In this video, we're going to look at the anatomy of the pen, we're going to look at how to hold the pen, we're going to look at and practice each of the 7 simulated texture techniques. So pause the video now, make sure you've got your rough draft drawing, maybe the practice sheet with all the little squares, your pen, your ink, and the cup that's provided in the bag. So the metal part of the pen is called a nib. The hole inside the nib is called the keyhole. And you'll notice that the nib isn't solid. It's actually 2 little prongs that are pushed together by the curve of the metal. The nib gets inserted inside the handle, right? And then you've got your cup for your ink. And if it's not already marked, it should have a mark just above the bottom of the cup, about right there. You don't want to fill the whole cup. One, the ink dries out. It is waterproof. It'll get clotted and have dry spots in it. And you never want the ink to get past or to the keyhole, or then it starts to draw the ink underneath up into the handle, and it ends up going places you don't want it to go. The ink will end up on your fingers, dripping on the paper, etc. So you're very carefully going to open your bottle, and you're going to put just enough ink to cover the bottom. And then dig the little ring out if it falls in. All right. So when you apply ink or get ink onto your nib, you're just barely touching the point of the nib into the bottom of the cup. You're not pushing hard, you're not scooping, you're not having to pick it up. And you'll notice right here on the underneath side, right, the ink is held up underneath it. When you hold the pen, you always want to hold the pen and draw with the pen with it curved this way over the top. The hole should be in the top, not scooped like a spoon. Because if you draw with it scooped like a spoon, it's eventually going to bend those prongs and they're going to cross, and then your pen will no longer hold any ink. So you're going to touch the bottom of the cup, get you a little bead of ink under there. You always want to draw on a down or side stroke. And you are just barely letting the weight of the pen travel on it. You should be able to make several marks before having to dip the pen again and retrieve more ink. Now, if you get a scratchy sound like this, or you start to get splatters on your paper, that's because you're holding the pen too straight up and down. You hold the pen at an angle just like you would write with it, right, with the keyhole on top. So go into your practice paper and just get a feel for how lightly you touch the paper. So if you want to pause the video now and play with some of these techniques, you can before we move on. All right, so I'm just real quick going to do a quick demonstration of each. So when we did these in class together, right, with the ballpoint pen, we talked about raising and lowering the pen off the paper as you applied the pen strokes. And I think you're going to find, right, it's actually easier to do with the speedball pen than it was with the ballpoint pen. You'll notice you can actually create weight with this pen. So I can push harder and get a thicker line and push lighter and have it thin out and get thicker again. So we can actually create the illusion of weight that we couldn't do with a ballpoint pen. So remember, scribble is random, lifting, placing the pen back on the paper. You don't want to line it up. Wavy lines are going to show creases in fabrics or bending in a surface or wood grain. So again, I'm just very lightly going in and adding those. Cross hatching was good for fabrics, anything with a weave. And I'm lifting the pen and applying it and going the same direction each time. All right, it's not a back and forth. We're lifting the pen and starting over and lifting the pen and starting over. Same thing with parallel lines. All right, parallel lines are good to show three-dimensionality in like folded surfaces. They're good to show shading inside scales on a fish or feathers on a bird. Crisscross lines, remember, were great for grass, fur. You can have short, spiky. We could use it for twigs as well. Contour lines are very much like wavy lines, except they're not connected, right? This is when we're trying to make things look 3D on the flat surface of the paper. So you're going to work from one direction and then I flip the paper or turn the paper so it's a little easier coming from the other direction. Again, very light pressure. And then of course, stippling is really good for sand. It's good to make the edges of things look blurry, stubble in a face. Your stipple can have patterns, right? Like wrinkles in leather. Somebody in class asked me about that. So just take a few minutes until you're comfortable with the control of the ink before moving on to outlining your final draft. So pause the video now, play with each one of these techniques, and then we'll come back and start outlining. All right. So don't forget, you have these 2 sheets in your packet. There's also additional examples on the back sides as well that you can use for reference. So now the first step on our final draft is to go ahead and start outlining. Oops. I dumped my ink on my desk there. And that's probably something I should have told you guys at the beginning, right? On your workspace, I would have a couple paper towels set down. There we go. So that if it does spill, it's going to catch the ink, hopefully, and keep it from running onto your paper, like I just did. So there's an example of what not to do. Don't have your cup of ink sitting on your final draft paper. Actually have it off to the side so that if it does spill, it's not going to hurt your project. All right, so I'm going to refill my cup here. And again, the first day is just going to be going in, lightly outlining your silhouette. If you're loading the pen correctly, you can get pretty long lines. It's always on a down or a side stroke. So if you need to turn the paper to maintain comfortable hand position, you can. Now, after working with the pen for, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes, sometimes it gets to where the pen doesn't seem like it's holding any ink. You can only draw about a 1-inch line, and you've got to dip the pen again. So more than likely what's happening is the prongs are getting stuck together, right? So what you can do is very lightly from the back, if you just gently press it until they just pop apart barely like that, you should be able to get longer lines again. Sometimes if you push too hard or you're doing a lot of stippling, the paper fiber can actually start to clog the tip as well. So what I suggest is get a paper towel or a napkin and use something with a solvent in it, like Windex. Glass cleaner works great. You can spray the paper towel. Because water and soap is not going to work because it's waterproof ink, right? You've got to use, if you do not have Windex, fingernail polish works well. Rubbing alcohol would do the same thing also. Okay, so that's going to get all the dried ink off of there. And then you can throw that away and then continue outlining the outside of the silhouette and the drawings on the inside. When it is time to clean up, if you have, first of all, keep the lid on the bottle. There we go. If you've got the Windex, I usually just hold the pen over the sink, spray it a couple times and rinse it, and it'll work perfect. Rubbing alcohol again will work. Use your Windex paper towel, but you want to clean that off each time. Okay, so that your pen stays clean. If you don't have a cup with a lid on it, you're basically going to have to dispose of this and then rinse the cup out. Or you might try some saran wrap, right? But it's going to eventually dry up. Some of the kits have a little clear cup with a lid. You could just screw top the lid back onto it and reopen it the next time you're ready to sit down and get some work done on it. And that is how you're going to get started on your abstract silhouettes.